Good? All right. Well, welcome to Dark Arts, everybody. Having a good time?
I'd like to thank the vast audience that has shown up.
Yes, it's been a fun time. Frank, he doesn't really go out to many events, so I invited him here for this one because there's some stuff in the works, which we will get to very, very soon. But first, Frank, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm very happy to be here. I'm having a great time. I'm thrilled to go anywhere because, as you know, I've been home working on my project for the past several years.
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, Frank was a producer on Street Trash, Spookies. He also starred in Street Trash, and a lot of people don't know is that you were a zombie in Dawn of the Dead.
He sells a zombie.
Yes. So why don't you go over a little bit of what was happening during that time of your life doing all these films?
Well, that was there was a whole filmmaking scene going on in New York that was pretty active. There were dozens and dozens of low-budget horror movies being made all over the place. We shot Street Trash in Brooklyn, in New York City. Oh, I'm sorry. We shot Spookies at the John Jay Estate, once owned by one of the governors of New York State in the 19th century. It was fun because there was an actual scene, there was stuff going on all the time. You know, Trauma was there in New York City.
It still is.
It still is, amazingly. The Trauma building was one of the great landmarks of New York City when it had the Toxic Avenger on the side, but no longer does. But I guess I sort of cut my teeth around that time in films like that, and since then I've had a very hit or miss career, still trying to make films.
Yes. And there's a big story behind Spookies that we can briefly go over. You hear it from the words from the man who was on the set himself. Frank, what was going on between you and the first team that went to go Spookies, and then things started transitioning? So,
some people know the story. There's on our Blu-ray. There's a very good feature-length documentary about the making of Spookies, or as it's called, the unmaking of Spookies. In that we shot an entire film, and then our backer became absolutely impossible to deal with. Myself and my partners walked out of the cutting room, and the next thing we knew, the film was finished except for optical and special effects and the climax, and the people who were planning to do that left with us, and so new people were brought in, and somehow the person he chose to take over the film was an ex-porn actor, or actress I should say, and director, and turned the film into a film that she could claim partial directing for credit for. In other words, she changed the movie drastically. If you've ever seen Spookies, there's a whole subsidiary plot with a guy who sort of, you think, is supervising what is happening with all the monsters in the film, but that was all added later for no real reason other than the fact that the climax got taken out, and he got conned into spending a lot more money.
Yes. It's one of those films that I feel like has gotten a lot of attention recently, mainly because of Vinegar Syndrome.
Well, and because they came out with a Blu-ray after the movie had been out of release. The first video release was the VHS cassette in about 1986, and there was no American video of any sort until about 5 years ago.
That's true. For anybody in the audience, have you seen Spookies or Street Trash before? Yes.
No, my God, these are two key films you should see.
Yes. How about Dawn of the Dead, the original? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there's been a lot of stuff going on in the background. I've known Frank going on, I think, almost 2 years now, and I interviewed him a while back. Just kind of talking about his career and everything, and bringing Frank out here, trying to get him to a wider audience for people to come and love his film. Especially Spookies, because for a while, you really thought everybody hated it.
Well, to tell the truth, I hated it. That was the problem. I hated what had been done to the film. It was not our film. It was sort of taken apart and reassembled. It was just not the film we made, and we did not like anything about what was done to it. However, eventually, as I said, it came to Blu-ray, And when Vinegar Syndrome brought it to Blu-ray, suddenly the fans took to it. Suddenly people who had been hearing about it for years saw it. People really liked it. The one thing that remained is that it's packed with special effects, practical special effects monsters that have been created. And just about all of our makeup people have gone on to become top people in the industry. Like Gabe Bartalos, who created The Leprechaun, did 2 of the Basket Case films, and has really been a top guy in the field. And then Vincent Postini, who came on, I think it was his first film job, and he's been doing major Hollywood special effects for many years at this point. And the thing I'm also supposed to mention here is that because of the film coming out on Blu-ray, it developed a new audience, it developed more of a reputation than it had before. And for me, it was like I saw the film through a new lens, because I previously was unable to feel comfortable about it in any way. But when I realized people still loved it, mainly for the monsters and the special effects. So, I mean, the original idea of the film was to have almost wall-to-wall monsters, and every time you turn a corner or something, with a new, very unusual monster. And the fact is, that's what we made the film to do, and that's the thing that people like it for at this point. I have very mixed feelings about what was done to it, as I said, and I think it's a lot weaker than the film we made, but it does, it apparently still has the entertainment value that was intended in the first place. And remarkably, it's become so, it's done well enough in its revival that I am at the start right now of raising finance to do a sequel. I'm hoping to get a couple of named horror actors into it. I'm also looking to make a film that is almost an anti-sequel. I don't just want to rehash what was done the first time. I don't want to even make a typical sequel. I think I want to make something that's almost an animal of its own. That it's different in so many ways, and I think it's the way I'm doing it is it's almost intended as a mockery of what happened to our original film.
Yes. So there you have it. Frank dropped it before I could ask the question, but yes, there's going to be a sequel happening for Spookies. I will say, someone who has read the script, it's really good. I enjoyed it a lot. But that's something that since, I guess you can say teaming up with Frank over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, is something that we've been trying to do and trying to just spread the word about. And I'm really excited for this project to finally come to fruition. And Frank, it's awesome having you here.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
For everybody to be here and meet you and see everything. It's a really, really fun time, and you're such a great person to be around.
Oh, well, that helps. That helps.
Yes.
Considering I've spent so much time the past few years at home alone at my computer doing various things connected to this project, it's nice to know there are real people in the world and that they are actually movie films.
Yes. For everybody in the audience, we do have time for anybody to ask any questions. If anybody has anything they want to ask.
Even if you've never seen my films.
Yes. Go ahead.
I got a quick question for you. In the 80s, when VCR movies first came out, if it wasn't for the horror genre, wrestling, and porn, VCRs probably would have never taken off.
That's really, you're right. Well, porn brings everything to prominence in any way.
My question to you is what was it like being part of this decade from the 80s to the 90s where the VCR brought horror into the homes, and it also brought the makeup with Rick Baker in, it brought...
I mean, to me, it was a great time to be making films, partly because I was already just such a big movie fan, to the point where I was a 16 millimeter film collector. So I was already collecting movies, and then suddenly you could get VHS tapes, and that was just like opening a door that you sort of never imagined until it actually happened. It made a big difference, and horror was again one of the real keys to making that work. And as Dustin and I have discussed many times, I mean, horror is the audience. The horror audience is the audience as far as I'm concerned. They are the most vocal, they are the most demonstrative, they are the people who really show their love for films. I mean, you guys are here today because you have a love of this genre, I guess. It comes down to if you just look at what's going on right now in the contemporary movie scene, horror is still, as of this moment, probably the biggest genre overall.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that one, for sure. It's just been crazy the amount of horror conventions that have been popping up, ones that have been around for a few years, and now we're going into bigger stadiums and just filling up huge spaces. I mean, we have the one we're at today, Dark Arts Festival, something that Josh put together all himself, one solo man putting all these vendors together, guests like Frank, for me to be able to come out, as my podcast and try to help Frank sponsor himself and to get more eyes on his projects, or to go and see the films that he's watched before. It means a lot to see people just even walking around and looking at some stuff, and it means a lot to us horror fans and creators.
Yeah, it does, and it's interesting because I've always found that, for instance, I've done some stage acting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to get applause and laughs from an audience and appear in front of a live audience. But I sort of prefer being able to make a film and then sit in the audience and enjoy that film with the audience.
So we'll shut that off.
And just use my mic.
It's not that big a room. I think they can hear me loudly enough.
That's some of the stuff that we're working on in the background. Frank, is there anything that you want to really highlight for this movie that we are currently working on?
Just that it's basically, to me, it's a love letter to the fans who made it possible to make another Spookies movie simply because they responded so positively to the first one that was sort of not readily available to see for many, many years. I'm actually the kind of person, and I don't think we actually discussed it, but I'm not like the biggest fan of sequels. It's like I get sort of tired of them after a while. But because there's a film called Spookies that has now made enough money for it to gain attention again, there can be a Spookies film.
Yes.
And I'm happy to make a film for anyone.
Hell yeah. And what about the Street Trash remake? How do you feel about that?
I feel very good about that. The Street Trash remake was made in South Africa by, I don't know if you guys are familiar with a film called Fried Barry, by a director named Ryan Kruger that came out a couple of years ago. I saw it, and then I was delighted to find out that the guy who was doing the Street Trash remake was Ryan Kruger, who has directed it, because he has just the right touch of sleaze and grime that I feel will benefit Street Trash.
Yes.
I mean, it's also amazing too when you make a low-budget film, and that years and years and years later, somebody wants to do a remake, or in my case, wants to do a sequel.
Yes.
I like things like that as a fan. I like them as a filmmaker.
Is there any way that the people can help us get Spookies to happen?
Well, they can all empty their bank accounts. No, it really comes down to just, you support films by seeing them one way or another. And most movies aren't even getting into theaters these days, so you've got streaming is what most people are turning to. But also, the horror fans are the ones, I don't know if anybody's done an analysis of it, but they, as far as I can see, are the ones driving a major portion of the Blu-ray and video market at this point.
Yeah, with all Vinegar Syndrome being one of them. Another big one that's been around for a while, but I think it's starting to gain a lot more traction is Severin. They've been putting a lot of stuff like that. It's just really cool to see these physical media boutiques still around, being able to essentially revive a film that was extended.
It's amazing in the extent that even in the 80s, when this horror was so big and horror was really just a boom to the whole video industry, it still didn't have real respect. It was still sort of looked down upon to some extent. And I think it's almost become a mainstream thing. The 80s brought about mainstream horror, I would say, in a way that previous decades did. Yeah. That was really the era of the serial killers who became the legendary characters that everybody knows about. Between Halloween and the Nightmare on Elm Street films, it really brought all that much more into the mainstream. So that suddenly that stuff, those names were household.
Yeah, sure. Is there any other questions in the audience that anybody wants to ask about? Could be Dawn of the Dead, Spookies, Street Trash. Is there anything that you would want to see?
The remake Dawn of the Dead too.
Yeah. Oh, and the remake. Yeah. No. Is there anything else that you want to touch upon before we let everybody go, Frank?
Not really, except I'd love to if if my movies come, if the new Street Trash comes out, if if Spookies 2 comes out soon, find a way to see it. That's all I ask. I think you might find something worthwhile there, and if you haven't seen the originals, by all means seek them out. They're not hard to find. In fact, Street Trash and Spookies are both currently on Tubi for streaming, free of charge.
Yes. And Frank also has physical Spookies DVDs over at his booth with some stills, posters of Street Trash and Spookies, and a bunch of other really, really cool things. I think that might be all we have, right, Frank?
Justin, where can people find your podcast?
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Thanks, Mom. My podcast is everywhere at YouTube. It's just the Bear and Title podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, all the good places. Thanks for asking. I think that's pretty much all that we have.
Yeah. Unless anybody else has something they'd like.
Did you watch the episode of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs that had Spookies on it?
That's a good one.
Yes, and in fact, I was a guest at the Mahoney Drive-In
Oh, really?
in Pennsylvania, and that was one of the things they showed was Spookies in the Joe Bob Briggs edition. Yeah, and actually that was great too, because I had a great time at the Drive-In Theater, but I became pals with like Yuki and John Brennan who does the music there, and you know it's interesting. It's because I mean one of the reasons I love like horror and stuff like that is, you know, you find yourself with a lot of similar-minded people. I mean, when I grew up, when I was a horror buff, starting maybe at the age of 12 or something, I was a weirdo. It's like, you know, there were people to talk to about this. They didn't like exactly accept that in the same way. It was just considered sort of fringe strange.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. Spookies 2 is in the works, and I'm excited to be part of this project and to see where it goes. Thank you for everybody that came out, listened to it. Maybe you discovered a new favorite film after today. Who knows? But this has been such a great time, and we will be at the booth all day. I'll be sitting next to Frank with some of my own stuff, and Frank will be having a bunch of his stuff as well. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for showing up, everybody.
Thank you.